Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is day 246, November the 9th, 2017, Thursday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Yesterday, I reported to you that it was being learned that Glen Simpson of Fusion GPS met with Veselnitskaya. In fact, he was seated right next to her in a court hearing before she went to the meeting, the so-called secret meeting at Trump Tower, with Kushner, Trump Jr., and Manafort. We also learned that he met with her after the meeting, and so it was being suggested that maybe he had some role to play. Well, now we're learning, it's all over the alternative independent media, the real media, that it's becoming more clear that Glen Simpson of Fusion GPS, using Rob Goldstein as his go-between, or Mr. Goldstone, Rob Goldstone, did arrange that meeting. Glen Simpson of Fusion GPS did arrange that little meeting. And that's very important. It's very important. Because remember, it was that little meeting that was used, of course, to obtain the FISA warrant, which led to massive surveillance, which led to hundreds and hundreds of unmaskings. There's more questions, and we'll get right to them. But first, let's dig into this a little bit. We are now learning from Glen Simpson's attorney of GPS Fusion today that he has now agreed to cut a deal, meaning he is going to testify. He's going to go back next week and testify to Devin Nunes' House Intelligence Committee. And his lawyer says he's going to tell the truth. Now, what's going on here? Well, we know that Devin Nunes, having already received some of the banking records he requested from the judge, has gone back and requested more. GPS Fusion attorneys were fighting that, but they know they're going to lose. Why are they going to lose? Well, what Mr. Nunes is looking for is proof that Fusion GPS, Glen Simpson specifically, paid journalists to push the phony dossier story and the overall Russian hacking and Russian narrative story. That Fusion was paying journalists. Well, Devin Nunes wants to know the name of those journalists. Now, the reason that he would be successful in court at getting those records, and Fusion GPS's attorney knows this, is because Devin Nunes can read, just like I can. As you know, here on TowerGate, I've been reporting to you for months and months now about the civil court hearings that have been going on in the UK of Mr. Gubarev versus Christopher Steele. And we know from those court filings that the attorneys for Christopher Steele have stated that their client told them that, basically, in a nutshell, to summarize it, that Glen Simpson had asked Christopher Steele to come to the United States to speak with some of these journalists. The reason is because Glen Simpson of Fusion GPS had been out shopping the dossier to all kinds of journalists. He went to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and everyone else, trying to get someone to bite, but none of them would. Mainly because, probably his sources, because they probably said, hey, where are you getting this information? And he probably said, oh, my British agent over in the UK. So finally, what happens is none of these papers are biting on Glen Simpson's offer to publish his story. So what he did to try to build support to it is he had Christopher Steele come to the United States, and so that Glen Simpson could take Christopher Steele around to all his journalist buddies at the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other outlets, and let him tell these journalists personally to their faces to build credibility for what he was trying to sell. But you probably know what happened there is those journalists from the New York Times and Washington Post and folks like that, they probably said, okay, well, it's nice to meet you, Mr. Steele. Go ahead and tell us what you know. And Steele probably sat there and gave them, the information, probably the same information given to them by Simpson. And then at some point, they probably did the logical thing any journalist would do. They looked at Steele and probably said, what's your sources? Who are your sources? And at which point, he probably said, oh, well, they're Russians. At which point, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and everyone else got up from the table and said, well, thank you very much. We'll see you. This meeting didn't happen. I wasn't here. Bye. Why? because they're smart enough to know that you don't want to run a story with your source being based on Russians. Not a good idea. And they also weren't going to publish a story that they knew would result in a slander case and would cost them millions and millions of dollars. The only people stupid enough to do that, apparently, was BuzzFeed. And what are they getting? A lawsuit. And they are going to be writing a big check to Mr. Gubarev. My guess is he will bankrupt BuzzFeed. He will bankrupt BuzzFeed. So this is basically what happened. And Devin Nunes knows it. In fact, Christopher Steele even mentions, his attorneys mention on his behalf, some of the media organization journalists that he met with. And he mentions the New York Times. He mentions the Washington Post. He mentions the Guardian. So he mentions all these papers, about a half a dozen. But Devin Nunes, he wants to know more, because he knows there's probably some big hitters in there, like ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, CNN. He probably knows that all these people. And what he wants to know is, did money change hands? Did Glen Fusion offer cash, and did any of them journalists accept? Now, why is Glenn Simpson suddenly decided to play ball? Well, because he knows that Devin Nunes is going to get the answers to these questions. And so Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS is determined the best thing to do, just like Donna Brazile, just like the law firm Perkins & Coie. All these people realize the best thing to do when you know that it's going to come out is get out there and release it yourself and get ahead of it. In this case, Glenn Simpson is trying to save his personal ass. His company is already probably history. GPS Fusion, my guess is, they're not getting very many clients right now, and they probably won't be getting any new clients in the future. Because once your name is dragged all over the media as having been a part of this diabolical plot, not many people want to do business with you. Not many people wanting to do business with GPS Fusion. So now Glenn Simpson, all that's over. That's done. He tried to protect them as long as he could. But now those days are long behind him. Now he's out to save his own personal ass. So he is going to throw some people under the bus. You can bet on that. Because that's what Devin Nunes is going to be looking for. I imagine Devin Nunes has some very good questions for him. And I imagine a couple of them questions are certainly going to be, give me a list of all the journalists whom you paid to run this fake dossier story or the Russian narrative. Give it up. And if you don't, I'm going to get the list anyway. I'm going to get it from your bank records. You can do it either way, Glenn. You can come clean and get ahead of it, and we'll give you some cover. We may not even prosecute you. You could become a state's witness. And keep in mind, Devin Nunes is an old prosecutor. He knows how to build a case from the outside in. It's exactly what he's doing. And Glenn Simpson's, he's watching Donna Brazile throw people under the bus. Oh, I'm sorry. Throw them to the wolves. Let me correct myself. Throw them to the wolves. He's watching people coming out of the woodwork, and he knows what's going on. He knows what's going to happen. He knows it's all coming out. And once people realize that the jig is up and that this stuff's all going to come out and you're going to be fingering in the deal anyway, you might as well come clean and see if you can cut yourself a little deal. Do the best for yourself that you can. It's common sense. It's done every day. It's how the system works. And that's what Mr. Simpson is doing right now. So he's cut the deal. He's going to talk. And what do you think he's going to talk about? Let me tell you another question he is definitely going to be asked. He is definitely going to be asked if he arranged, or what his involvement was in arranging that little meeting with Veselnitskaya and the former Russian military analyst, intelligence analyst, who's now a political operator in Washington, along with Kushner, Manafort, and Trump Jr. Devin Nunes is going to want to know, did you arrange that meeting, or what role did you have in that meeting being arranged? Obviously, he used Mr. Goldstone as the in-between. But it was totally GPS Fusion. One other question that he might be asked is, did someone motivate you to do that? Would that someone be named the Rotten Reverend Clinton? You see where this is all leading, folks? Everything leads back to the Rotten Reverend. Everything. If you track it all down, when it all shakes itself out, when we get to the bottom of every bit of this, you're going to find that every bit of this was orchestrated by the rotten reverend. She's a control freak. She had her finger on the button of everything. She knew everything. She was directing and guiding everything. $1.2 billion. Why do you think she lost the election? Let's also remember that this gets to be a much, much bigger picture when you dig even deeper, which is what I would be doing, and I'm pretty sure Devin Nunes has got the same thing figured out that I've got figured out. If I've got it figured out, I know he does. And that is that you have to look at the role of James Comey and keep in mind, as I said, he's building his investigation from the outside in. That's why Comey and Clinton and Loretta Lynch will be the last three people to testify, because it's all going to come down to those three: the rotten reverend, the dishonorable James Comey, and Loretta Lynch. You see, James Comey has got a big problem in this case that Nunes is now building against him, because he's going to put James Comey in a very, very bad situation when they finally bring him back, and he'll be one of the last because he is now the target. You see, James Comey has to either admit one of two things. He has to either admit that he was duped by the dossier, believed it, and therefore used it as intelligence to launch FISA warrants, other types of surveillance, which led to unmaskings, and the whole investigation, which led to the investigation of appointing Robert Mueller. All this. Is James Comey going to admit that the FBI was that duped? They would look like complete idiots, and especially him. Do you think for a minute that the FBI didn't know within 15 minutes who bankrolled the dossier and exactly what was going on? Unlike these committees that have to go to court and jump through all kinds of hoops, the FBI director doesn't need to do any of that. He could have got the bank records to Fusion GPS when he saw that dossier. He could have looked into Fusion GPS and probably in 24 hours with a couple agents working on it could have known every bit of this that we're learning now, and probably did know it. So James Comey has either got to admit A, that he was duped by the dossier and actually took it for real intelligence, which will mean he's a complete idiot, and it's almost not believable. It's almost just, you can't believe that the FBI could be that stupid. It's just nearly impossible to believe. Or he has to admit that he did know that the Fusion GPS was funding the dossier and that Hillary Rodham Clinton was the client, paying for it all, directing it all, guiding it all. Now the only question becomes, was James Comey an active part of it? Was he colluding with the Obama administration, the Justice Department, the Rotten Reverend Clinton campaign to use GPS Fusion to do their dirty work, with Christopher Steele being used as the stooge? And whether or not those Russian sources are even real or not, we don't even know. But James Comey would have had to have known, certainly, that the sources were Russian. How's he going to explain that? How is James Comey going to explain any of this without looking like either a criminal or a fool? That's his choice. The dishonorable James Comey is either going to look like a complete idiot, which is almost not believable, or he's going to look like he's guilty. I'm pretty sure we're all going to figure out that it's the latter, because there's much, much more. That's just one area of the questions they'll be going into with Comey. The dishonorable James Comey has a lot of problems. He surely does. The picture is becoming quite clear now. And when we get to the bottom of this, we're going to find out that this was exactly what I've been saying it was months ago. It was a political covert operation which involved the Obama administration, the Rotten Reverend Clinton campaign, the DNC, which she was controlling, we now know that, the intelligence and law enforcement community, all designed to discredit and destroy the campaign, the candidacy of Donald Trump. And once he won, then they went immediately into destruction mode of his presidency, and now the cover-up, which is why Bob Mueller is there. He's there to cover up the crimes. and divert attention away from the real crimes, to drag his investigation out as long as he can, to get a few people here on some tax evasion or not filling out a form correctly or what have you. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. This is all coming out, and I think Mr. Fusion, GPS Glen Simpson knows it. He knows it. He knows what's coming, and he's going to get out ahead of it too. He's going to save his neck, just like a lot of other rats will be fleeing the ship known as the USS Hillary, which is going down. It is taking on water. It is going down. It has hit the iceberg, and it is going down. And when it's all said and done, and the rats have all fled the ship, the only one left up there pooping on the poop deck in her Mao Zedong pantsuit will be the rotten Reverend Clinton, at which time she'll check into the hospital with serious medical issues. Well done. Thank you very much. Well, Jesse Jackson has been accused of sexual assault again, sexually assaulting a 21-year-old college student. You can see the video. He does it on camera. That's even better. Hey, if you're going to assault a 21-year-old college student, hey, why not do it on video? That should be a slam dunk case. Maybe Jesse Jackson will have to pay for a change. Jesse. Senator Magoo, another man who's got a lot of issues and a lot of questions to answer about the dossier and his association with the Rotten Reverend, the FBI, and Fusion GPS. The Reverend Magoo is now walking around in a boot because of an Achilles injury. Oh, but he's promising to derail Trump's tax reform plan. Question, I was asked, why the Democrats and the DNC so pissed off at Donna Brazile? Shouldn't they be happy that she's exposing the corruption to maybe clean that mess up in the Democratic Party so they can recover and maybe win every now and then? Well, let me tell you why they're so pissed off at Donna Brazile. It's a pretty easy one. Lawsuits. As you know, there's been several different lawsuits. Two of them actually went pretty far. One of them actually went really pretty far, but eventually it got shut down too. But now that Donna Brazile has presented the document, which clearly shows that the Rotten Reverend took complete control over the DNC and was the DNC, and that it was rigged, there'll no longer be any question as to whether or not a lawsuit can be successful. And the Democrats, the Rotten Reverend, and the DNC all know this. That's why they're so mad at Donna Brazile. If she just would have came out and made a bunch of allegations and salacious comments or something, giving her opinion of things, that's one thing. But to come out and out the document itself that lays out the guidelines for how they're going to rig it, well, that's a slam dunk in the court of law, certainly in the court of public opinion. And I can assure you that Mr. and Mrs. Beck will be back in that courtroom bright and early tomorrow morning, probably, and other people as well. And you will see an even larger class action lawsuit because now they have the hard smoking gun evidence, and all those Bernie Sanders supporters and all that money has got to be accounted for. I can tell you that the reason why Brazile's taking so much heat is because she outed the document, not so much the comments she's making. That stuff would just go into her book. It will be forgotten about in a few weeks. It's all here and gone. But once she talked about that particular document and it's now been shown and everybody's got a copy of it and you can view it online, or everybody's got a copy of it. I'm sure Mr. and Mrs. Beck have a copy of it. I'm sure many other attorneys who are right now preparing their lawsuits also have a copy of it. And they will go back to court against the DNC and probably the Rotten Reverend Clinton, and they will win. That's why they're so mad at Donna Brazile. She provided the evidence that was lacking in the other lawsuits. Here's an interesting story. I'll preface this by saying that generally I like Alex Jones. I think his heart's in the right place, but I would never base any of my opinion on any story broken on InfoWars without getting at least one or two other good sources to back it. Because, you know, it's Alex Jones and he's kind of over the top and all that kind of stuff. I like Alex, but it's definitely a case of I would have to have other sources before I run with anything I hear on InfoWars. But there is something here I want to bring up that occurred on his show the other day. He was talking to one of his regular guests, Shepard Arbelas, was on the show, and he stated that ETS risk management was on the ground before, during, and after the October 1st attack in Las Vegas. Now, ETS is a Saudi-based private military firm that provides security services to multinationals, high net worth individuals, NGOs, and scholastic organizations. Now, during the podcast that he was doing with Mr. Arabella, Zach, who's a regular caller and sometimes guest on the Alex Jones show, who claims to have sources at high levels inside the Special Forces Command, and I don't know if he was a member of Special Forces or worked there as a civilian or whatever, but he's on the Alex Jones show from time to time, and he's generally viewed as an intelligence source because he has connections, he says, to Special Forces High Command. Now, he is calling in at this point during the show to second and verify what Mr. Arabella was saying, that ETS risk management was on the ground the night of the Las Vegas shooting. Now, it should be noted that ETS is, of course, a Saudi-owned company. They're very closely connected to Saudi intelligence, who also is known to have a role in 9/11 and many other nefarious activities, deeply connected with rogue elements of American intelligence agencies, as well as British and Israeli, very, very connected to Israeli intelligence. They're essentially one and the same. In fact, I almost think sometimes that Israeli intelligence actually runs Saudi intelligence. That's how connected they are. But the other point that we should note is that the Four Seasons Hotel, which is the top 4 or 5 floors of the Mandalay Bay Hotel, is part owned by Prince Alawid bin Talal, one of the corrupt Saudis, Hillary Clinton's largest single donor. Of course, he was the biggest name of the corrupt criminals in Saudi Arabia that was recently arrested. He owns half of that top 4 floors of Mandalay Bay Hotel, the Four Seasons. Do you know who owns the other half? Who his partner is? You might recognize him. He's kind of popular. He owns a bunch of companies. In fact, one of the biggest companies in the world. You might have heard of it. It's called Microsoft. He also owns another company called Cascade Investment, based in Seattle. Cascade Investment is the other part owner, along with Mr. Bin Talal, of the Four Seasons Hotel. And we do know that Bill Gates, as well as being a eugenicist and a New World Order shill, is also a hardcore anti-gun, gun control advocate. Bill Gates and Prince Bin Talal. And what did the Saudi government say that they were specifically focusing on Mr. Talal about? His corruption and involvement in pay-to-play schemes. Now, this sheds some new light on what may have happened at the Las Vegas shooting and why we now have another good question, not in my previous list of questions, but boy, this is a very good question to ask the FBI and the sheriff. That question would be, were you aware of the presence of ETS risk management being all over the place? Not just at the Mandalay Bay, but at all those casinos, because this particular group, ETS Risk Management, does security all over Vegas, and they're have contracts with almost all of these hotels and casinos. There are many, many of these ETS Risk Management paramilitary guys who were all over the place on the night of that shooting in Las Vegas. Why hasn't the Las Vegas police chief, Deputy Dog, told us about that? Why hasn't the FBI told us about that? Is it true or is it false? This is a question they need to answer. And if they were there, these are armed paramilitary types. Not your typical rent-a-cop, not your typical security guard. These are ex-military, typically ex-military, paramilitary type, heavily armed guys who generally guard very, very wealthy people that come into casinos to gamble. They offer them protection, security. They also guard the hotel and the whole 9 yards. These are some hardcore military types. Why Why? What did they do? Stand down? Why were they not participating? Why have we heard nothing about that? Why don't we know that ETS was on the ground after over a month? Does the sheriff know that? Does the FBI know that? How could they not? A simple investigation in speaking with any of these casinos and hotels that were involved, certainly in part of that questioning would have come up the questions of security and security arrangements that they had. Certainly they would have volunteered, oh, well, we have ETS. I guess they didn't feel that was important to mention. Let me tell you what, it's a very important point to mention, because we know the types of nefarious activities this group is known for, the types of things they're involved in, such as 9/11, such as various false flag attacks all over the Middle East, their close association with Israeli Mossad, and the type of nasty things that they do. They work closely with rogue elements of the intelligence agencies, rogue independent international contractors. These are dirty, dirty guys. They certainly are, and they were on the ground in Las Vegas, according to these two individuals. I don't take it 100% because it is Alex Jones, but it certainly makes sense, and it's certainly a question that needs to be asked and answered, one of the many. Somebody email Tucker Carlson, ask him if he knows about that. I know Tucker's a big fan of this particular conspiracy theory. Anthony Weiner began his prison sentence for sexting minors yesterday. His 21-month sentence. We'll see if Mr. Weiner emerges from jail singing a couple octaves higher than when he went in. My guess is he will, or he could end up like Jeffrey Dahmer. My understanding is that these guys in prison don't like guys like Anthony Weiner very well, and I'm pretty sure he's a sissy. He's a sissy. He's probably the pivot man right now. Volunteers. Don't hurt me, I'll be the pivot man. That's right. Well, the German military this was reported in Der Spiegel, the largest German newspaper in Germany. I used to read it when I was there. I used to read some fairly fluent German. It's been a while, so my German's kind of weak. But I used to read Der Spiegel. It's the most respected paper in Germany. They had a major story, front page story that broke, I believe, on Saturday or Sunday. I'm just now getting to this. I've had it for 3 or 4 days. The German military has been doing military exercises preparing for the collapse of the EU, which they believe will be done by 2040. They believe that by 2040, the EU will have completely collapsed. And this is because, as many of us have stated, the economic policy of the EU is not sustainable. It's a socialist policy, and it's made the EU uncompetitive in the world. They cannot compete with their socialist economic agenda. Their plan doesn't work. It's a failure. It's failed everywhere. It failed for many, many years in Europe before the EU came along, and now they're recreating what was the failed policies before. But that's what they're doing, and everyone knows they're failing. They cannot compete internationally with the current socialist economic policy of the EU, and that's one reason why the EU will collapse. Also, their destructive immigration policies, which are shredding and dividing the entire continent. But probably nothing more than the fact that the Eastern Bloc countries, as we've seen in the last 2 to 3 years, are flat out rejecting to follow the edict of the EU. The splinter has already occurred, and as I've been telling you for weeks and weeks now, watch very closely the Eastern Bloc. And I'm talking specifically about Hungary, Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, which involves 3 countries, Austria, and Poland. Watch these countries very carefully. They are the former Eastern Bloc countries. They're actually becoming closer with Russia, with the exception of Poland, but all the rest are actually getting closer ties with Russia. They are completely opposed to the EU. They are building their own walls. They are completely rejecting EU policy across the board, and it's just a matter of time. Just a matter of time before those dominoes start to fall. I've been telling you, watch the Eastern Bloc countries, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland. These are the countries which are going to start to fall. It will not happen on the West. It will not happen from Britain, Sweden, and all these countries, and Denmark and Germany. It will not happen there. It will start, the dominoes will start to fall from the East and go West. This is exactly what's going to happen, and I don't think it will take till 2040. I think it's going to happen much sooner than that. And we should be getting some more entertainment. It appears that the newly elected Donald Trump of Hungary has now announced his EU representative, the guy who will be going to the EU and doing what Nigel Farage used to do. And this guy's a lot like Farage, so he's going to be showing up. I can't remember his name, but you'll be seeing his videos pop up just like he did Farage. He's the same type of character. He's funny, he's sarcastic, he's very smart, he's totally anti-EU, and as we see Farage leaving the EU, not really showing up there too much anymore because there's no need to, you're going to see this guy kind of take his place. And so we should be finding a new guy on the international stage that we can enjoy watching videos of as he trashes the EU technocrats right to their face. Should be interesting. We are learning now that Uncle Bob and the rotten donor Hillary posse will probably be bringing charges against Michael Flynn. So there goes another leak out of the Uncle Bob Mueller leak factory. Once again, every time a leak comes out of the Uncle Bob leak factory, it is a crime. No one seems to care. Trey Gowdy, the pit bull, seems to care, but nothing's really happening. Somebody on Mueller's team, or Mueller himself, is leaking the shit. Period. So they leak this too. You think, Mike? You think that Uncle Bob will find out who the person was who illegally leaked the phone call of Michael Flynn? It came from Signal Intelligence. Can't be that hard to track down. You think Uncle Bob will figure out who the illegal leak came from that started all of that? Think he's working hard on it? I doubt it. One more story. This was retweeted by Julian Assange. Luke Rosiak has now done some digging, and this is really easy. All of us should have figured this out about 3 months ago or more. He's determined that 9 of the 10 most damaging emails released by WikiLeaks were written after CrowdStrike was brought in. And what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that that 9 out of 10 of these things, of course, were written after May the 5th. And that kind of tells us that Seymour Hersh was correct when Seymour Hersh said that his sources told him that Seth Rich was the leaker, but that Seth Rich actually only leaked a sample. Only a sample. So that tells us that plays into what Seymour Hersh is saying, because it appears that there was a lot of stuff that Seth Rich had downloaded, but he only got to send some of it. So this is why CrowdStrike would have been brought in 2 months earlier than we were told, why the hack or the breach of the system happened probably 2 months before we were told. And they decided, according to Donna Brazile, even after they were told, to go on with it because it was during the primaries. And this would, of course, further explain why CrowdStrike would come up with the Russian narrative and everything else. You see, it's all starting to come together. But it all comes down to one thing. Examine the damn servers. Examine the servers. As soon as these servers are examined, we can put all this stuff to bed. That is where the smoking gun to this whole thing is. Examine the servers. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I appreciate each and every one of you. You all have a good night. And I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. Good night.